It's finally starting to happen. It's getting close. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, spring is on the way. Temps are starting to warm up, and a lot of us are about ready to get those boats back out. But of course, spring and its warmer temps bring a few other issues for some of those people who enjoy being out on the water. But many of us are ready for those issues, but some will still be unexpected, just like some of the things we'll see in this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. Our first story to make the boating news this week is going to take us down to Florida, where this past week, 4 men had to be rescued off the coast of Florida when their boat went out of Port Everglades and began to take on water and wound up sinking. The vessel was approximately 6 miles offshore at the time of the incident. The whole thing took place so fast that the gentlemen barely had time to get life jackets on. In fact, one didn't even have one on, and they were holding onto coolers to stay afloat. The first reports that came into authorities claimed that the people were near Dania Beach, but that turned out to be inaccurate. These gentlemen were significantly north of that and closer to Boynton Beach. Fortunately, one of the crew members here seen in the water still had their cell phone and it was still working at the time. They were able to contact the local authorities and let them know the exact location they were floating in, and within minutes, rescuers were able to locate them and get all 4 men pulled to safety. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us up to Alaska, where this past week the Coast Guard had to medevac a man from a fish processing vessel approximately 92 miles northwest of Dutch Harbor. The initial medevac request came from America's Finest at approximately 2:30 a.m. The master of the vessel claimed that one of the crew members had suffered a severe foot injury at the time. Coast Guard Command Center directed the launch of a Dolphin crew as well as a Coast Guard HC-130 Hercules airplane crew, which launched from the Air Station Kodiak. At the time of the crew's arrival, they were greeted to weather that had 30 to 40 mile an hour winds with 15-foot seas and heavy freezing spray, causing this dramatic footage that you see here as they try and airlift the crew member off the vessel. The Coast Guard MH-65 helicopter crew was able to successfully hoist the man from the 262-foot fish processing vessel and was taken back to Dutch Harbor for care. But these are wild scenes to watch when the Coast Guard has to get out there in these conditions. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to the Persian Gulf, where this past week the United Arab Emirates flagged vessel Al Salmi 6 sank off Iran's southern coast with approximately 30 crew members on board. The roll-on roll-off cargo vessel that was carrying a load of cars ran into rough weather with winds exceeding 40 miles an hour, possibly shifting some cargo, causing the vessel to list and eventually sink. Of the 30 crew members on board, 16 were initially rescued by Iranian rescue workers. Another 11 were able to successfully get themselves off the vessel and onto life rafts. Another crew member was later retrieved by a nearby tanker from the rough waters, but 2 crew members were still in the sea. Efforts were underway for rescue attempts, but they were hampered by bad weather. This has been a rough month for vessels carrying cars at sea. As you may remember, a few weeks back we talked about the Felicity Ace, which is another car-carrying vessel that caught on fire with 4,000 cars on board. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to Egypt, where Egyptian authorities rescued a crew off of a Lebanese cargo vessel that sank outside the anchorage area of Alexandria. The Lebanese ship Ayla was carrying 3.9 tons of scrap iron. The ship was coming from Lebanon to the port of Alexandria and completely sank after experiencing extremely high winds, causing the vessel to list to one of its sides and eventually causing the vessel to totally capsize. Fortunately, due to the quick reaction time of the Egyptian authorities and the Alexandria Port Authority, all 10 crew members who were on board the Ayla at the time of the sinking were able to be successfully rescued. To give you an idea of how bad the weather was at the time and how high the winds were, they actually wound up closing the port of Alexandria due to the high winds. Local officials say this is actually the second vessel to sink in the last several months in the port of Alexandria due to bad weather, as the Sea Queen sank back on December 10th when Alexandria experienced waves of close to 15 foot. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us down to Australia, where it finally got announced this week that cruising will finally be allowed to resume in Australia sometime shortly after the April 17th deadline of the current cruise ban. The current ban that's been in place blocks large international cruise vessels from entering Australia and has been in place since March of 2020. This past week, Australia's current health minister Greg Hunt confirmed he would not be extending the ban, which is planned to expire on April 17th. based on the basis of medical advice and with the backing of the National Cabinet. But I wouldn't pack my bags just yet. Many of the cruise lines say it may take longer than a month for the cruise ships to return to Australia. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. If you ever see anything crazy happening out in your waterways, be sure to hit me up on Facebook or Instagram and let me know when you might see your stories over here. And if you haven't already, go ahead and drop an anchor on the subscribe button here. If not, we're coming to steal your drain plug.